Welcome to Seattle Voices. I'm Eric Liu. I'm delighted to have as my guest today my friend Annemarie Kause, the provost of the University of Washington. Annemarie, welcome.
Very glad to be here, Eric.
So those academic nerds like me know that provost means chief academic officer, but it also means that you essentially are having to herd a million cats, right?
Well, absolutely, and wonderful, wild, feral, and that's how we want them.
Wild and feral, that's good.
Well, it's interesting because, I think that sometimes people do complain that particularly faculty tends to go its own way, but we go out of our way to hire really bright, really smart, really accomplished, really independent people, and then we wonder, why don't they just follow orders? This is, it's like democracy. It's messy, it's difficult, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
So the idea of a chief academic officer can encompass so much. I mean, just from, standards of rigor and integrity all the way up to new disciplines, that are emerging. Where in the kind of spectrum of activity do you tend to focus your energies?
Well, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for it all together with the president, of course. And part of what I really love about the job is that where I focus my energy really does change. It's a job that changes day to day, week to week, month to month. Sometimes you're spending all of your energy trying to create new programs, new interdisciplinary initiatives. Sometimes you're really dealing with programs that are already there and may not be going so well, and you need to prop up some way. Sometimes you're dealing primarily with issues that concern faculty. Other times it's primarily students, sometimes staff. There's not. I've been in the job now. I'm starting in my third year, and I'm still looking for what that rhythm is. And there's a little bit of rhythm. There's the start of the year. There's commencement season. There's state legislative session. So there are some rhythms, but the job changes every day, and I love that about it.
Is it possible, given that constant current of change, to actually have a strategy and execute it, or do you feel like you're often just having to, maybe even in a good way, respond and react to things?
Well, it's a little bit both. A lot of schools do strategic business plans, and we do things a little bit differently at the university. And a few years ago, we launched an initiative that we called 2Y2D, and from 2 years to 2 decades. And at that point, it was partly we were in the middle of financial crisis, and we were focusing all our efforts on how to get out of it. And so the idea was, yes, we're going to focus on the next 2 years, but with an eye to where do we want to be 2 decades from now. Well, the financial crisis isn't exactly over, but the worst of it is gone. But we've kept up the 2Y2D in large part because I think it's a nice kind of framework. The things that occupy most of your time and the strategy that you can more or less control to some degree, or at least predict to some degree, given that we're on a budget cycle that's a 2-year budget cycle, is 2 years. But at the same time, you really do have some initiative, some direction, and you want to be, marching with your eye on the horizon, which is 2 decades out.
So what are some examples of some things that you really want to be moving toward over in the 2D side of that equation?
Well, I think that, everyone knows that higher education is changing. It's changing very rapidly. And in many ways, that's wonderful because students have a lot more options about how they want to engage with their education, how they want to, in some cases, mix and match, whether they want to be, at home with their computer screen or, out into the community. So one of the things that we're really focusing on is, okay, if we are going to ask students, young people, sometimes, middle-aged people and older people too, to take, in essence, 4 years out of their life, come live someplace, sometimes different, and spend their time on campus. What is it about an on-campus, in-person learning environment that adds to a lot more richness than sitting at home with a computer screen? And so we're focusing a lot. We've had you on campus a few times on things like leadership and citizenship and, that whole set of enriching experiences, working with businesses, working with NGOs, working in our research labs, side by side with our scientists, getting involved in entrepreneurship, all those other activities that make it critical, in fact, for students to be on campus. I think that's going to be more and more that kind of student experience is going to be more and more important to, it's already a hallmark of privates, but to the great public universities. I think that some of what we're doing in terms of focusing on idea to impact. So I think in the past, often we've relied almost on serendipity to take those discoveries that are happening in our laboratories into the commercial world, into the scientific world, into healthcare. Madame Curie, her discovery was by accident. We still believe very strongly in basic research. That's absolutely imperative. No one else does it but universities because, pretty much a lot of the industries, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, aren't doing it anymore. So it's critical that universities are doing it. But we want to do that in an environment where we're surrounded by people who care about applications, by folks who are interested in bringing those discoveries out so that we can kind of give that push to serendipity.
Okay, so even right there, you've named a couple of profound tensions that have always lived in a university, but particularly because right now, as you say, higher education is, thanks to the economy, thanks to technology, getting upended in many ways. These tensions become much more salient, right? So a tension between basic research and teaching, on the one side, a tension between usable knowledge that one could get by whatever means in order to, get a good job on the one side, and in-person experiences that are harder to quantify, but still some kind of tangible. And so one temptation is say, we're going to do it all, right? And that's what it means, university, right, to kind of encompass it all. But in an age of narrowing budgets, if you can't do it all, where do you want to put your bets, and where do you want to put your priorities?
Okay. I'm going to add one more tension because it's another area, and that's between disciplinarity, which is very important, and interdisciplinarity, which is becoming more and more important. Universities can't do it all. But I do think that particularly at the University of Washington, we're a 3-campus system. We have a very large medical school, health sciences in general, that is across the state. I mean, we serve Eastern Washington. In fact, we serve 4 other states. I think that the real trick for us is how do we use that comprehensiveness to advantage? With a number of these things, we really create false dichotomies. Interdisciplinarity, disciplinarity. Well, you can't have interdisciplinarity without disciplines, okay? You can't have, one of the things that, we are working on trying to convince the business community, convince the legislature, et cetera, that if we don't fund, if we don't keep basic research healthy, it's like you're eating the seed corn. You're not going to have the discoveries 5 years from now, 10 years from now that build this wonderful, vibrant economic environment that we live here in Washington State. So they're kind of false dichotomies. So I think the issue isn't so much how do we decide between disciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, between basic research and applied, or between, a narrowly focused education and a broad student experience, but within those, how do you bring those two together, and how within those do we focus? So, there are a huge number of interdisciplinary efforts that we could possibly do, and we're really focusing our bets on, a few different areas that we are, again, any faculty can do anything, but there's a few areas where we're going to leverage
like what?
Our research. Well, right now we've been talking a lot about this Institute of Protein Design. That really is a huge partnership between lower campus, the Department of Chemistry, Biology, Biochemistry, and very much the medical school is involved, engineering is involved. They're all kind of coming together, and the kinds of things that we can do by, in essence, designing new proteins. We're hoping, and David Baker, who is in biochemistry engineering, I mean, he's everywhere, and his whole team, by designing proteins. You can do everything from trying to design a protein that's going to attack a particular kind of tumor or a particular kind of cancer to potentially dealing with renewable energy. I mean, it really is the cornerstone of a radically different approach. And so, we look at things and we say, where do we have strengths and where do we have leadership? Because that's really important as well. And where do we see the potential? There's a whole range of them. We're doing a lot in terms of, bringing our programs together that are focused on global issues. And that's everything from science, building bridges in China, to developing, understanding what the culture is. So looking at the humanities and social sciences, looking at business and entrepreneurships. So, it really is not about picking one discipline or another, or one approach or another, but within those, how do we bring them together in ways that really draw from our comprehensiveness? Some people think that our size, they say, oh, you're so big, we're going to get lost. And us, it's more like New York. If you can make it here, you can find anything you want here. And you can really pull things together that you're never going to get in a smaller school.
That's a good sales pitch. I hadn't heard the New York analogy before.
Except it's a Washington State analogy.
Well, actually, this is my next question. So, one of the things, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, the idea of leadership in our region, right? So, of course, the University of Washington produces many leaders across every sector,
absolutely,
particularly in public life in our state and our region. And I suppose there's an underlying question of, number one, is there a particularly Cascadian or Northwest way of leading, solving problems, running enterprises, public or private, that we should be trying to both capture and propagate? And then number two, do you see that as the responsibility of the University of Washington to really cultivate not only leaders for our region, but a particular kind of leader with a particular kind of ethic?
Well, the answer is yes. I do see that as the responsibility of, quite frankly, all our universities, but since we're the largest, the University of Washington, but I see it as a responsibility that's done in partnership. It's not just, it's like sometimes, we put the public schools are supposed to do everything, and or the universities are supposed to do everything. And these are really about partnerships. It's about partnerships with the business community. It's about partnership with a very rich community that we have here of nonprofits. It's a partnership with community, with parents. And so we do have, and we're having fireside chats with leaders like you to come in, local leaders. We have a ton of them here. I mean, very recently there was a poll that talked about the top 25, the 25 most admired companies in the U.S. And I think somewhere between 20 and 25% of them were Seattle-based companies. We have leaders here, not just in Seattle, but in the broader Washington community. And so we want to bring them on campus. This is really about partnerships. Do we have a special type of leader? Well, yeah, I think so. I think that when I think about the Northwest, and I've been here for 29 years now, so this is my home, I really think about strength, but with a lot of compassion. When you think about the great companies here, they care about the neighborhoods that they're in. So many of them have programs where they do matching programs so that if their employees give, they match. Or they'll give employees some time off that's counted towards work to go work in the communities. I think that there's a sense of caring here that, maybe it has to do with the fact that we've been a little bit more isolated and we've had to care for ourselves. The other thing that's very striking to me, because even though I've been here for 29 years, every once in a while I still feel a little bit like an outsider. I was, raised in the other part of the world.
You were born in Cuba and,
I was born in
raised
Cuba,
in Miami.
Raised
right?
in Miami, yes. And one of the things I love about here is the rich multiculturalness. I mean, there are other cities, other states where the numbers of non-white, so to speak, are larger, but we really have the full rainbow coalition in terms of, Native Americans, a range of Asian communities, Southeast Asians, Pacific Islanders, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Latino community that is also increasingly, it's not all Mexican American now, it's also increasingly Central American as well. An African American community that's been here a long time, and a growing Ethiopian and East African community. We do the whole range, and I think that that's actually very Seattle or very Washington State, very different than in some states where it might be 2 or 3 ethnicities, and that's pretty much it. So I think we have our own flavor, the outdoorsiness, the big business, but, one of the things I love about this place, there's no place you can't go in Gore-Tex,
right.
including the opera.
Well, you are as apt to post on your Facebook a photo from campus as you are a photo from a hike you're on, and
yes.
that typifies it. I want to return a bit to your origins and the path that you took. You emigrated to the United States when you were 3, I bet?
Yes.
Yeah. And grew up in Miami. Tell me about just the way in which your kind of family culture formed you. And I don't mean necessarily a Cuban culture per se, but just the culture of the little universe of your family.
Yeah, I was very privileged to grow up in the family that I grew up in. And I actually, my father was Minister of Education in Cuba. He had, grew up from very humble origins, but that was the position he had when the Cuban Revolution came. I'm a product of my father's second marriage, so big age difference between my father and mother. And my parents really lost everything in a very major way. They went from a life of prestige and economic well-being to one where they both were working in factories. My mom had worked before, but not in a factory setting. For most of my growing up, my mother made tennis shoes, my father made dress shoes. And so they lost a lot. I think one of the reasons why I'm in education, certainly it has to do with my dad's background, but I remember him constantly saying that education is the only thing that nobody can take away from you. And they'd taken pretty much everything away from him. But at the same time, I feel so lucky to have, in fact, not grown up with some of the privileges that I might have grown up elsewhere. And, I want to be very clear. Compared to most other people in similar socioeconomic environments, my family, I remember going to pick up stuff at, the welfare office. And, at those points, it was before they actually gave you food stamps. They actually gave you food, and you'd pick up jars of peanut butter. And we did that for a short period of time. But I was very privileged in, there was never any question but that I'd go to college. And that was never a question for me, like it is for so many people growing up in that kind of environment. I always had that horizon. My parents didn't understand too much about how the educational system worked in this country. So, for example, my brother, because of our economic circumstances, started off in community college. And it wasn't until one of his professors there said, you should apply for a scholarship and, you can go someplace different and it won't cost you more. So it was kind of an odd existence. There was, on the one hand, my father used to sit down with us, I remember it was Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, and quite frankly, my brother and I hated it for a while. And we had to come home from school, and he'd give us lessons when he came home from work on Cuban history and geography. I think he still thought we were going to go back. Mm-hmm. And so we'd sit down and, we'd practice our Spanish. But I think it filled us with a sense of pride in our community, a pride in the history that we have as Latinos, as Cubans, that gave us an incredible advantage. And, like I say, in that sense, I was privileged. But I also understand I started working when I was 16. And, my last 2 years of high school, I was working 25, 30 hours a week. And so, I kind of know a little bit about both, and I feel that was a privilege too.
And the ability to know that you had on the horizon going to college, and that education was going to be so central. As we sit here today, we both recently had a chance to visit with Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who was in town, and her circumstances different from both your and my family's circumstances, but the single thread of education as an engine, and in a sense, motivation or initiative as the coal in that engine, right? And so, in her case, she was highly self-motivated to keep on pushing herself, to learn new things, to challenge herself, to get out of her comfort zone. For you, where did the motivation come from? Do you feel like it was intrinsic, or do you feel like both the opportunity and obligations that your dad or your parents were kind of imparting to you made you feel like you needed to live up to something?
Well, I think it was both. I definitely am someone that has a lot of drive. And I had an older brother that was very accomplished and, 2 years older, and anything he could do, I was going to do. And so, that pushed me as well. But also, my parents' expectations for both of us were very high. And like I say, there was never any question that, we were going to go to college and that, we were going to be accomplished.
And so where did you end up going to college? In Miami?
I went to University of Miami. At the end of the day, I'm a Cuban girl, and my family thought that as a Cuban girl, I should not leave home for college. And University of Miami was very good to me.
Yeah. And then you went on and pursued a graduate education at Yale.
Yes, I actually went to the University of Miami for 3 years, and I did my 4 years in 3 and pushed through because I actually wanted to leave home. And was,
That's a good source of motivation.
I mean, not that I didn't love my parents, but,
For sure. And you ended up in the field of psychology.
Yes.
When did that kind of crystallize for you?
Well, I started off as actually a double major in English and journalism. I had, kind of two ambitions. One was to write the great Cuban-American novel, and then the other one was to be, a journalist traveling all over the world. And but as I went through in school, I realized kind of two different things. One is that, what I loved about literature, what I loved about English was less, as I got into junior and senior year, and it was much more about, dissecting, how things were written, and that, what I really loved about literature was the people stories. And I still think that a good novel can tell you more about people and their motivations than, reading a psychology.
TV show, actually.
Yes, absolutely. And that I'm not sure. I mean, I think journalism, and particularly, hard-nosed journalism is very important. This was right after the Watergate, years, but that it didn't suit my temperament. I love talking to people, but I kind of want to help them not. And what did you really, mean by that? And I think that's important, but it wasn't me. And at the same time, I started taking psychology classes, and I really saw how that fit with my feeling and my inclination to be involved in the community and to connect with people. And it just, psychology and the practice of psychology was something that not only, fed my head, but it fed my heart and my hands.
And so, as you went deeper into academia and in the realm of psychology, but then when you came to the University of Washington, you also started getting opportunities essentially to enter into administration, right? In the ethnic studies department initially, and made your way up to the role that you have now of provost. Kind of the classic question for people who are in academia and decide to go into administration. Was that hard? Was it hard to kind of let go of the single focus path of diving deep in your discipline, knowing that by being an administrator you would have to, let go of some of that?
Well, I think that, if you had asked me when I took my first mini administrative job that would I ever want to be provost and, what would I have to let go to do that, I would have said, you're crazy. But, you do it in degrees. And, before you know it, you're all in. So that, I kept my research career very much alive through my deanship. And in fact, my last 2 graduate students are graduating.
This is Dean of Arts and Sciences.
Yes.
Yeah.
My last 2 graduate students are graduating this year. So I've had, academic research grants right up till now. I still have some grants, but they're really much more about student services and leadership, et cetera. And I probably will not go back to the lab, so to speak, after these 2 students graduate, but it wasn't until now. Last year I taught a freshman seminar. I'll probably do one every other year. I don't want to give up teaching.
What did you teach?
I actually taught a class on stress and coping.
Something you've learned more about and they could use a lesson
and
on.
I think it's very important freshman year.
Yeah.
More students who don't make it, it's not because they're not smart enough, it's because they're not handling stress very well and they're using maladaptive ways of coping. It's every Friday afternoon, or just about every Friday afternoon, I spend the last 2 hours of the day with students, with the Provost Advisory Committee. In essence, working together, teaching them about the university, them teaching me about the university. So, you let go of some things, no question, but it happens incrementally. And then, like I say, all of a sudden, you're all in.
So final question for you. As you look forward to the next bunch of years, what do you see? Do you see returning to the great Cuban-American novel? Do you see aspiring to the presidency of a university? Do you see something altogether different?
Well, I really love where I'm at now. I love what this job is about. It's a little bit more about the internal aspect of the university. I have certainly some external functions. And so, I'd like to stay here for a while. And I want to stay in Seattle. I want to stay in the Pacific Northwest. This is my home. I grew up in a household that was always full of longing. My parents never fully came to grips with the home they lost. This is my home. I don't want to lose it. And so I see myself staying here. If, there wasn't a space for me, I'd be happy to go back into the classroom. For me, aspirations are more about things I want to do rather than positions I want to hold.
Well, Seattle and this whole region is lucky that you are going to be satisfying that sense of longing by sticking here. So thank you for joining us, Anna Mari.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
My guest today has been Anna Mari Cauce. She is the provost of the University of Washington. I'm Eric Liu. This is Seattle Voices. Thanks for joining us.